but we survived. And we're going to continue answering these super chat questions because we've got a lot of them to get through. So there you go. I believe when we ended, and if somebody, as we pour back in here, if somebody can post this link in the old chat, if someone can post this link in the old chat, we're still here. They have not silenced us yet. But if someone can post this link in the old chat, then we'll just keep going. We'll just keep rolling ahead like we always do. And there you go. All right, so here we are, and we're not going anywhere, and they will not shut us down because we're still here. So yeah, that's basically the Council on Foreign Relations, right? It's basically the academic wing of American intelligence. Okay, American intelligence, the actual agencies, just get shit done, right? Their job is to get shit done. CFR thinks of what to do, and the intelligence apparatus, they don't do it, right? They have somebody else do it, and they don't pay for it, right? The National Endowment for Democracy pays for it. The Ford Foundation pays for it. That's how this stuff tends to work. And there's a lot of very good books that have been written about this. Wayne Madsen wrote a very, very good book, about the CIA. It's called like The Company. I believe it's very, very good. And there are a number of very, very good books on the U.S. intelligence apparatus. Now, we have to keep in mind a lot of it's very outdated, right? I think a lot of what the American intelligence apparatus does at this point is probably on the internet, which is not a component of it that used to be. A lot of this stuff that's published during the time of the Church Committee. There was the Congressional Church Committee, which was a congressional investigation of the CIA. And that's how, MK Ultra, the CIA drug program, became public record because of the Church Committee, right? I say, the CIA had this program where it was giving people LSD and all that. And they go, oh, yeah, Caleb. Yeah, I bet that's true. And I say, well, I didn't say it. It's in the congressional record. It's a matter of public record. And the same with COINTELPRO. The reason we know about COINTELPRO is because of the Congressional Church Committee that revealed these things. So in the 70s, there was a lot of very good revelations that came out about MK Ultra, about coups, et cetera. And so you had the publication, the Church Committee did publish a number of things. And, there's a very good book about CIA brainwashing and mind control, and it's called The Search for the Manchurian Candidate. It's very, very good. Stephen Kinzer has written a number of very good books about the operations of the CIA and how they operate. Stephen Kinzer is very, very good. There's a number of very good publications out there that describe what I'm talking about. So there you go. All righty. All right. China's social credit system. Well, I am going to defer on this to, Nathan Rich is a great friend of what we do here. He's an amazing YouTube personality, and he digs into this stuff in great depth, okay? And he actually lives in China. He's lived in China for years now, and he talks about this in ways that if I talk about this, I have a general understanding, right? But, if I talk about it, I will probably get some detail wrong. And then people will be able to point to that detail and say that everything I've said is complete bull honking. So rather than get some detail of it wrong, I would defer to the work of Nathan Rich and others. And that's what I'm going to do. So there you go. On the social credit stuff, check out Nathan Rich. All righty. All right, next super chat question. And keep them rolling in, folks. We got a few to get through, right? But the night is young, and I'm not, it's not like I'm going to a big party or something. I'm here partying with all of you because I love you all. So there you go. All right. Great religious communists throughout history. All right. Nicolas Maduro, Hugo Chavez, Daniel Ortega, to start with. Those are a few very, very good religious communists. Who else? Michel Aflaq. Michel Aflaq, the founder of Baathism, was a Christian who became an atheist and then later became a Muslim, I believe. He converted to Islam because he understood that Islam was the great religion of the Arab people and was a great expression of Arabism, even though he was from a Christian family. Who else? Great religious communists throughout history. Dorothy Day, the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement. Dorothy Day was a great religious communist, absolutely. Geez, I mean, we're just sitting here naming things off. Who else? Father Roy Bourgeois, the Catholic priest who I believe he destroyed draft records in protest of the Vietnam War and was a big advocate of Christian socialism. Father Roy Bourgeois. It's kind of ironic that his last name was Bourgeois, but he was a great Roman Catholic priest who was a socialist. Father Grappi in Minnesota, I believe, was in Minneapolis, who led protests for integration and against segregated neighborhoods, and was a big supporter of the black community. I would include him. Oh, geez, there were many. I mean, in Latin America, there have been many priests who were socialists and embraced liberation theology throughout history. The Sandinista government of Nicaragua, the Sandinista government, in its preamble to its constitution, has a sentence about Christianity, right? You can actually read the preamble. Go and read the preamble to the Nicaraguan Constitution, and there is actually a sentence that says, we are true Christians who care for... It's pretty intense. So yeah, Gaddafi, Islamic socialism, right? Gaddafi was very much a Muslim and based his system, the system of Libya when it was a socialist country, on Islamic principles. It was a secular government, but Islam was very much the basis for it. He called his ideology Islamic socialism or Kibism. Wow. Who else? There have been many. Fidel Castro converted to Christianity. He had confession. In the 90s, Fidel Castro became Roman Catholic. People don't talk about that. But yes, Abdel Nasser of Egypt, that's another name I see in the chat. There's many. And obviously, many people would say, the greatest socialist of history, Hugo Chavez said, was Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ, if you look at his movement, was a socialist movement. They held all, they held all things in common. They wanted a society where all were cared for. The last shall be first, and the first shall be last. They were not scientific socialists, mind you. They were utopian socialists and religious socialists. And Karl Kautsky writes extensively about this in The Foundations of Christianity. He argues that Jesus is probably a composite figure based on many different figures that were fighting for the liberation of the peoples of Palestine and the Jewish people from the Roman Empire. And he was a composite of many different figures that were executed by the Romans for their fight against the Roman Empire. But that all of these sects, you want to call it, all of these zealots that fought the Roman Empire, did practice some form of utopian communism. And it's interesting because, there is a writer that folks will remember. I don't know if he's still as popular as he once was. I think he was very big around the time of the 2008 financial crisis. There was a guy named Alain Badiou, who was a French intellectual. And he had a concept called the idea of communism. And he argued that while scientific socialism... while scientific socialism was new, he argued that there has been within the human spirit a desire to build a utopia that goes back to the beginning of time, from the slave revolts of Spartacus, from Plato's Republic, etc. So, his concept was that, throughout history, and there's some truth in that. Before Mao was born, there was an event called the Taiping Uprising. And at the Taiping Uprising, you had, they were trying to build God's kingdom on earth. It was a peasant uprising led by a Chinese man who believed he was the younger brother of Jesus, sent to earth to complete Jesus' mission on earth and build a socialist heavenly kingdom. So even before, even in China, you had socialist utopian peasant uprisings that took place. Was it Thomas Munzer? The peasant revolutionary of Germany, who was very much, religious. So yes, throughout history, there have been many religious communists, no question about it, right? The Marxist movement of the 20th century was very, very atheist. Was very, very atheist. But that was because they were fighting against feudalism. But largely, nowadays, atheism, as I've made the point over and over, modern atheism, the new atheist movement, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, those folks love capitalism, love imperialism, and so there you go, and hate communism. Bill Maher said on his program that Scientology was a lot like communism, and his program Religulous, his video Religulous, his film Religulous, and showing the IRA freedom fighters and showing, the Palestinian resistance and saying, oh, these fights are caused because of religion. It's all just because of religion. And it was like, I was sitting there, I was like, really? The Irish people only want freedom because they're just stupidly religious and they're not as smart as you? Huh? That's what it is? It's horrifying. The new atheist movement is awful. So there you go. All right, Dennis Kucinich for mayor. I didn't know Dennis Kucinich was running for mayor. Dennis Kucinich is great. When I was in college in Cleveland, Dennis Kucinich, I was just some kid in college, right? I handed out communist newspapers. I was just a kid in college. But I was a college kid, and I was in his district, and he was my congressional representative, and he remembered my name, right? Again, that is very important. Politicians, a good politician can remember people's names. There is absolutely no reason he should have remembered my name. But every time I ran into Dennis, he would say, hey, Caleb, how are things doing and he would say the name of my college. That's kind of amazing. But he was like that. And even Republicans would vote for him. That was one thing. Dennis Kucinich could win on the west side of Cleveland. People that were Republicans that didn't agree with anything he said practically would vote for him because he was known to just love the community so much. He was just a well-loved person in the community. Just very, very well-loved in the community in Cleveland. He's a great politician, right? I don't know. A progressive, an anti-imperialist. He's gone to Syria to stand against the war in Syria. He advocates, jobs, housing, education. He's a progressive. I love Dennis Kucinich. Unfortunately, when I was in college, I was around some kind of ultra-left groups that were a little critical of him. But, if I were living in Cleveland now, right? And I would just start volunteering, and I didn't have the job I have. I have to stay out of politics. I can't campaign for anybody or endorse anybody. If I were living in Cleveland now, I would probably just go to Dennis's office and be like, how can I help you, sir? But there you go. I'm not playing that role, and I certainly can't campaign for anybody now, and I don't endorse any candidate here. Don't know who he's running against, but, I have positive feelings about Dennis Kucinich, no question about it. All righty. Faux progressive wokeness. People talk about virtue signaling and how everyone's trying to prove to everyone what a good person they are and, that it has a fake quality to it. People aren't genuine about what they really think. They know what the party line is. They want to prove to people. They use words. They don't even understand what they mean, and they say, well, I recognize my white privilege, and they want everyone in the room to go, wow, what a good person you are. And it's just like people, they don't really believe in the concepts. They're just kind of grandstanding. They want the approval of others. It gets on people's nerves. People don't like it. It has a fake quality to it, and people don't like that. People don't like that. People don't like fakeness. All right. The 2000 anti-war movement. What was the problem recruiting youth? That's a good question, Shia. That's when I first got involved. I was a high school student. I couldn't really get involved. I caught the tail end of it. What's interesting about the 2001 and then 2002, you had, the push to invade Iraq, the eventual invasion of Iraq, big protests against it, hundreds of thousands of people marching in Washington, D.C., hundreds of thousands of people marching in Washington, D.C. against the invasion of Iraq. And, it was big. It was big. What was interesting about it was at that point, the capitalist class were not really fighting with each other. Nowadays, there's a vicious fight between the Trump faction and the globalist or upper-handed faction of the ruling class. There was no fight back then, Nancy Pelosi was for the invasion of Iraq. Joe Biden was for it. The ones who were against the war were fringe, Robert Byrd and Dennis Kucinich and, Bernie Sanders and, some of those folks were against it. But for the most part, most of the Democratic Party was for it. The whole Republican Party was for it. And the opposition to the war in Iraq was very from below. It wasn't a popular front because Democrats didn't want anything to do with it for the most part. And so it was very much, and that's why, the Answer Coalition, somebody mentioned them. They were part of the Workers' World Party, and they knew very well how to get permits and secure stages. And because there was no faction of the ruling class that wanted to mobilize opposition to the Iraq War, a communist group, was able to gain some momentum. And that's how I first heard of the Workers' World Party, which I ended up being a member of for a long time, was I read about them in the press because there were all these articles that were saying, don't protest the war in Iraq because it's all controlled by this evil Stalinist group called the Workers' World Party. And I was a teenager, and I was getting really interested in communism, and I thought, damn, Stalinist group running big anti-war protests, that sounds pretty cool to me. That's how I got, interested in the Workers' World Party at first. Was around some other Maoists first, but, what was interesting about the Iraq War protests, the 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, and really by the time Bush took office, it was over. Or by the time Bush left office, it was over. What was interesting was it was not the new, the synthetic left had not gotten full hegemony, right? You had the Revolutionary Communist Party, the Bobavakian people, and they had a group called Not in Our Name, and they did their thing. You had the Workers' World Party, and eventually the split, what is now PSL, the Answer Coalition, broke away. They did their thing. The Communist Party, they did United for Peace and Justice, and they were with DSA. The Communist Party and DSA had United for Peace and Justice. That was, it was just kind of, the society in general had the attitude like, hands off, right? It wasn't like it is now where, there'll be a Black Lives Matter rally and CNN will be promoting it and they'll have the helicopter. Here's where the protesters are. It wasn't like that at all. It'd be like one little news story here, one little news story there, but they didn't want people to know about it. Most of society, Democrats, Republicans, almost every faction of the ruling class kept its distance from the Iraq War protest movement. And so because of that, that created kind of an opening for radical forces, to be the leaders of it. And it was communists that were leaders of the protests, right? But at the same time, it didn't have anywhere near the momentum. Rachel Maddow wasn't promoting it. I mean, she didn't even have a show yet. And it was just kind of, and what was interesting was it was also, one thing I noticed about the Iraq War protest days was that they were kind of, they were like an odd collection of anybody who didn't fit in with society. Right? And I noticed this, after 9/11, you have 9/11 Truth, and like libertarians. The Libertarian Party was part of those protests, and they would come and hand out their stuff and march, and they were libertarians. Whatever, they're libertarians, they're against the war, okay, right? Alex Jones was around. He was very obscure, he didn't have anywhere near the following he is now, but he was around, he was part of those protests. Lyndon LaRouche and their people, they were there, conspiracy people, black national. It was just the Iraq War protests were largely, it was a collection of people who were against the war. U.S. society, the ruling class of the United States supported the war, and there were a lot of people who didn't. Europe didn't. Around the world, people didn't. But in the United States, pretty much everybody did. But there was a section of the population that wasn't going to go along with it, and so they gathered in the protest cage and they did their thing. I agree with you, Mr. Fire or Mrs. Fire or Ms. Fire or Miss, I agree with you. There was a group of people that were in the protest cage who didn't agree, and society kind of kept them at a distance. And Fox News kind of liked, there was a protest in D.C. where Fox News, I remember I went to this one, they incited all these bikers to come and counter-protest it, the Gathering of Eagles, they were called. And, but it was not like it is now. It wasn't like Black Lives Matter now. It wasn't like the Stop Trump protests now. It wasn't like that. It wasn't even like Occupy Wall Street, honestly. It was different. It was very much U.S. society is moving one way. There's some people who don't agree with it, and they do their thing, and they're ignored by the media, and they're ignored by both parties together, and that's it. And that's really how it was. And what's interesting is all the communist groups recruited from it. I remember, the Revolutionary Communist Party recruited a number of people in Cleveland from it. The Workers' World Party recruited a number of people, and then most of them ended up breaking away and forming the Party of Socialism and Liberation. The Socialist Workers' Party, the SWP, the militant, they were recruiting people. They had a lot of people, and, there were a number of people that were recruited, from the, and it was just kind of, again, various elements that don't agree with U.S. society, they did their thing. But the capitalists were united, right? Ronald Reagan in the 80s, he said, we're all friends after 6. And at that point, they were. And up into 2004, they were, right? The big fights in the ruling class started, they intensified around the time that Obama, that Obama got elected, 2008 financial crisis. Bush had created a lot of problems. highest oil prices in history. Middle East is all mad at the United States, the religious right, and Venezuela and Bolivarianism is going ahead full steam, and Russia has rebooted because of Putin's economic policies and the high oil prices. And yeah, there was a big, the crisis that imperialism is in now had not fully solidified yet. Imperialism is now in a very big crisis, but that crisis didn't really intensify to the point that the capitalists started fighting with each other really until about 2008, 2009. One thing that that really irks me about the 2008-2009 financial crisis that I am still very angry about, is the fact that like I said, these protests, this isn't the part I'm angry about, but I'm explaining it to you. So these protests were very much collections of anybody who disagreed with the status quo in the United States, right? Libertarians, I went to rallies. There was a guy in Cleveland who was a Libertarian Party member, who was the leader of the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society. And he would come to the anti-war rallies put on by the RCP or put on by Workers' World. He'd get on the microphone and say, yes, we got to follow the Constitution. George W. Bush is a Trotskyist. He believes in communism. And they just let him do his thing. It was just collections of anybody who didn't agree with things, right? So I'm in college. I'm part of this anti-war movement. Right? And again, there's a lot of, So I went to college, and I went to a very conservative college for the most part. A lot of Republicans. Campus Crusade for Christ was very big. And, it was, whatever. I mean, there were a lot of Democrats, too. A lot of people voted for Obama and stuff. But around the time of, 2007, 2008, a lot of people that I went to college with, I've been in college for a couple years now, a lot of people I went to college with, Obama's getting elected, and these are people that have, supported Bush, supported the war, supported torture, right, Juneteenth, supported torture, right? They were just, normal conservatives, All of a sudden, they're saying, you know what, these wars are wrong. I'm like, wow, it took you this long to figure it out? I've been saying that for a long time. They're saying, yeah, and we can't trust the government. Did you know that the government, had this thing called COINTELPRO where they went after Martin Luther King? And all these people I'm meeting that were totally against the war, totally for the wars, totally trusted the government, are waking up and the government's torturing people. And they're saying, and it's because they're communists. And I was like, wait, what? And they're like, yeah, the war is communist. Because the communists want a global government. And I'd be like, no, and yeah, COINTELPRO is like a communist program, and we need to go back to the founding fathers. And the problem is we have a big government, and all these people that had been total neocon idiots are waking up, realizing the wars are wrong, realizing that that there's a problem, and becoming more right wing. Bit of a problem, isn't it? I remember going to the communists, and just for years I had this fight with them. I said, we need to ideologically push back against this, right? We need to argue with these people. We need to argue with these people. We need to show them that no, libertarianism is wrong. Capitalism isn't the answer. The USA is not a socialist country. We need to argue with these people. And the response I got from the leftists was, no, we just got to build the movement. I said, what? Yeah, we just got to build the movement, right? These people, they'll come to our anti-war rallies. They're confused now, but they'll eventually come around to our side. It's just build the movement. And I'm like, no, you don't get it. There are people who used to just believe everything was fine. They're waking up, but they're waking up wrong, okay? There are people that used to be for all the wars that are now against the wars and think the wars are communist. We have a fucking problem, okay? And it was just, no, just build the movement. Just build the movement. Just build the movement. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. We need to argue with these people. We need to ideologically engage with these people. We need to have pamphlets to give to them to refute their arguments. We need to know what these people believe. This is a problem. I spent, the first few political years of activism trying to wake people up. Now people are waking up, and they're waking up wrong. We have a problem. And there was no no interest whatsoever in arguing with people about this. There was just, no, just build the movement, man. That's how the PSL is, and that's how the Workers' World Party is, and that was how the RCP was, I mean, and it's like, and that's how these groups have no interest, right? So all these people that are suddenly don't have peace with the system. Used to be middle America was just totally in line with everything, and they thought all the anti-war protesters, a bunch of crazy hippies. Now all of a sudden they're against the wars. There's bikers and conservatives. They're against the wars, but they're against the war because they're all communists. They're against, and there's no effort to ideologically engage with people. And I'm still very angry about this. And when you see what happened on Capitol Hill, January 6th, you see what happened in 2017 back in Charlottesville, this is all their fault. They refused. All these people that are now crazy right-wing extremists, white nationalists, QAnon, all this. I'm sorry, if these people had been approached, when they were waking up and they were against the war, if you had done something other than your stupid protest hustle, if you'd actually tried to find out what these people believe and argue against it, like I was telling people to do, things would be different. But oh no, just build the movement, man, right? Just build the movement. Ideology is not important, only white people are interested in communism, which is that is so wrong. That is not true. That is not true at all. I'm sorry, I've been to global communist gatherings. The white people there are the minority. The overwhelming majority of communists in the world are not white. The overwhelming majority of communists in the world at this point are Chinese, right? I mean, the Chinese Communist Party is by 90 million people. But South Africa, Latin America, I mean, I'm sorry. The idea that communism is white is the dumbest thing I have ever heard. The dumbest. Marxism is not white. Marxism is not white, okay? It was in 1848, yeah, was maybe 150 years ago, but nowadays, Marxism is not a white ideology by any means, right? Synthetic leftism is pretty white, that's true. As much as they try to cover that up, the synthetic left wants to make it look like they represent people of color and such, but largely the synthetic left is rich white kids and suburban white kids. But let's be real, though. Around the world, the majority of people that study Marx and Lenin and believe in Marxist-Leninist ideology and are part of communist parties and communist-led controlled labor unions and communist community organizations are not white people, okay? They are not. I mean, I'm sorry, but, all over Africa, you have strong communist parties. South Africa, Zimbabwe, Angola, Vietnam, you have, China, I mean, Latin America, I mean, look, Chile is, there's a communist candidate who's out in front in Chile, and I'm sorry, but it's like, Peru, communism is not a white ideology, right? And being interested in Marxism and communism is not a white thing, okay? But that was the excuse I was given for why we can't engage in any ideological work. Oh no, only white people engage in that kind of work. Only white people read Marx. Only white people are interested in communism, I was told. No, people of color are not interested in that. And that's just you being an arrogant white man. You wanting to argue with these people that are becoming reactionaries and actually change their perspective. That's white. Only white people do that. Yeah, I mean, it's just, just build the movement, man. Just build the movement, man. Build another protest. I'm sorry. I'm very angry at these people. This doesn't have to be happening right now. January 6th, Charlottesville, this didn't have to happen. This did not have to happen, right? But the communist movement is led by hustlers and con men who have decided that ideology isn't important. Just build the movement, man. Just build the movement, man. And, I was saying we need to produce literature about communism. We need to go door to door in neighborhoods. We need to get to people about communism. And they said, just build the movement, man. Just build the movement, man. Well, look how great. Now we have a movement that's nuts. First of all, we had a rise of the ultra-right wing when the American working class was getting angry and finally waking up. Instead of becoming Marxist, they became right-wing. And so now the ruling class has fomented this synthetic fake left to try and push back against them. And the communist groups are more obscure and more irrelevant than ever before. Great. Thanks, guys. Good one. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks for making that happen. The situation in the country, we have two toxic evils. On the right, we have libertarianism, which is very, it's like a pipeline to white supremacy, but libertarianism, might is right, privatize everything, the economic side of liberalism. And then we have the synthetic left, which is cancel culture and anti-populism and anti-communism and color, and so it's like, that's the social side of liberalism. And actual Marxism is obscure and no one knows about it. And so here I am. I have to do it. And I'm building the Center for Political Innovation. What the Center for Political Innovation is doing now, right, with the books that we're publishing, the meetups and events we're holding and talking about holding very soon, this is what all these groups should have been doing 20 years ago. 10, 20 years ago, this is what they should have been doing, right? It's 2021. If in 2001, the people that built the Answer Coalition, the people that built United for Peace and Justice, the people that, if instead of doing that, instead of building the movement, man, so they could be like groovy protesters, dude, and they could like get the permit, man, we set up the stage, we're the vanguard. Instead of doing that, they had been going to Middle America, China, next superpower. They had been going to Middle America and trying to win these people to be communists. There would never have been a January 6th. There would never have been, Charlottesville. And instead of Donald Trump, we probably would have had something like a Hugo Chavez in America by now. We would have had an anti-monopoly government, right? I mean, obviously, it would have been fought against hard enough. We would be in a much better situation. But these communists put their own careers and their own little protest hustles, right? They want to hustle foundation money. They want to set up the stage. They want to get the permit. They want to feel good about themselves. They put their own careers ahead of what needed to be done. What needed to be done, which was ideologically engage the masses of people. It needed to be done. And all the old boomers who run the communist groups didn't feel like doing it. And so it didn't get done. Didn't get done. And, well, now we're playing catch up. Now I'm doing it. I'm doing it. So there you go. I'm doing it, right? I'm doing what should have been done a long time ago. And what was the argument? This is my favorite argument. What was the argument? The argument, if you ever brought this up, if you ever said to these communists, hey, hey, Workers' World, hey, PSL, hey, RCP, hey, why don't we actually go to the masses? They say, well, you just want to talk to people, but we actually do something. That was their argument. We actually do something. Right? I mean, that should be the slogan of PSL. PSL, we actually do something. We actually do something. See, I got news for you, right? There are communist groups in the United States that do nothing but campaign for Democrats. And you know what? They're doing something. There are communist groups in the United States who do nothing but work inside of the labor movement. And you know what? They're doing something. There are communist groups that just sell books. They're doing something. The issue is not, are you actually doing something? The issue is, what are you doing? And is it helping or not? That's the issue. That's the issue. What are you doing? And is it helping? That's the issue. That is the issue. What are you doing and is it helping? And the thing is, these tasks should not be in competition with each other. That's why I'm not forming a new party. One of the reasons. I mean, I'm a journalist. I can't be a member of any party. That's the primary reason. The other reason is because there is no group in the United States that's actually a party right now. A party, a communist party, a real communist party is like an orchestra. An orchestra does not have just one instrument. Did you know that? An orchestra has many instruments, right? An orchestra has trombones. An orchestra has trumpets. An orchestra has a piano. It's usually got violins and oboes and cellos and drums and harps. And a real communist party is an orchestra, meaning that a communist party, a real communist party, has people who organize in the labor movement. And it has people who organize demonstrations in the streets. And it has people who write books, and it publishes newspapers and has media publications. And it has people on the college campuses working with academics. And it has people who build relationships with Democrats and with elected officials. That's what a real communist party would do. And the reason that they're all one party is because there's one conductor. The party is the conductor, leading all kinds of people that do very important things. You can't have a revolution if the labor movement's against you. You can't have a revolution if you're not communicating your revolutionary movement and its message. Can't have a revolution if you don't have a relationship with all kinds of people, elected officials. Can't have a revolution if no one supports you on the campus. All of these tasks are important. The way the communist movement works nowadays is all the groups are tiny. They're just tiny little groups, and they all do one thing. But then they go around saying that that one thing that they do is better than what everyone else does. I don't do that. I don't do that, right? I'm not doing that. I know what I want the Center for Political Innovation to do. Educate, raise awareness, put forward policy solutions. And am I against people working in the labor movement? Absolutely not. And I hope they read our publications and we inspire them in how to do it. Am I against people, protesting in the streets? Of course not. And I hope that they read CPI publications, and while they do it, they apply some of what they learn. Am I against people running for office and all of that? No. I hope that my literature and our movement inspires them, right? CPI is formed to do one task. A real communist movement would do many tasks. And none of the parties that exist right now can really call themselves parties because they don't do many different tasks. They do one task, and they insist that everyone else is a phony because they do another task. And that's a problem. That's a big, big problem. It's a big problem, right, that we have as the organized left, is that, I'm sorry, but there is a task that needs to be done, that has needed to be done for about, we're doing it 30, 40, 50 years too late, which is getting to the masses. Getting to the masses is our task. Getting to the masses and teaching them communism is our task. And at this point, nobody's doing that. So we have to do it. And I have to do it. If you want it done, you got to do it yourself. Well, that's what we're doing, right? And that's why I'm building the Center for Political Innovation. The Center for Political Innovation is not a party. There are PSL people who work with us. There are RCP, well, there's no RCP people at this point, but there's CPUSA people who work with us. There's PCUSA people who work with us, Party of Communists who work with us. There are people in the Socialist Party who work with us. There's people in DSA who work with us. I don't care. There's Trots who are coming to our events. We got some meetups coming up. There's a Trotskyite. He said, am I allowed to come because I'm a Trotskyite? And I said, yes, sir, you are allowed to come because you're a Trotskyite. That's okay. There's a pastor who I've been working with, and this guy, he believes in socialism, big admirer of Gaddafi. He is a creationist, though. He is absolutely clear. He is very, very adamant that he literally believes. That's fine. He's welcome to come on board. There are people with many different perspectives. My job is to educate people about socialism. I am taking on a task that needs to be done. The Center for Political Innovation needs to educate people about socialism. And that's what we're doing. Nobody else is doing it. All the other parties have found another task, which may be an important task, but I've spent my entire career as a socialist, my entire life as a socialist, looking at the socialist movement and saying, why aren't we doing this? So now it needs to be done. Now it needs to be done. If you want to join with me in doing it, you're welcome to join. Don't care if and if you don't think it needs to be done, that's fine. You don't have to. And we are not a party. And you're allowed to be a member of any party and be a member of no party, right? And anyone who says that this is me trying to form a new party and be the new leader, I'm not going to be the leader of the socialist movement. Look, I'm not, okay? I don't have the patience for it. Look, I can't stand the amount of hate I'm getting and all of that, and trust me, right? I'm not going to be the leader of the socialist movement in the United States. I am going to build the Center for Political Innovation, which will be an important mechanism for raising the awareness and getting out of the movement into the masses. All right? I am going to reorient the socialist movement. That's what I'm going to do. That's the role that I see for myself. If you want to do it with me, you're welcome to help me out and come on board and be part of the effort. I am all about putting other people forward, right? There's somebody I'm working with now, and I don't want to give too many specifics, but they're very interested in a particular figure in the history of the Cold War. Particular figure. And I've noticed that there's not another particular, there's not a lot of knowledge of this figure in the socialist movement. And I said, you know what, why don't you give a presentation? So, we're probably going to have an event in New York City. We're going to, rent a classroom, and this person's going to give a presentation about it. This person's never given a public speech on socialism before, but they're going to do it. That's my idea. I want to put other people forward, right? It's not about me. It's not about me. It's about putting other people forward. It's about enabling other people to do what needs to be done. That's what I'm trying to do. There are so many people who are attracted to these lives, attracted to what I have to say and my beliefs, and I want to enable these people to do good shit, to get shit done, right? Dust James has a great channel. Check out Dust James' channel. It's amazing. Check out David Fox's channel. Amazing stuff. Parasocialite has an amazing channel. He does like reaction videos. He shows, it's great. I'm not competing with you. And I'll bring you on my channel, you guys, anytime. Anybody who wants to do this, right? Bridget, she's got a podcast, I think. There's a woman named Bridget who's got a podcast. She's pretty awesome. And, I love what Luna does. And that's the thing. I'm not a competitor, right? This isn't a competition, right? This isn't a competition, right? We'd all like to see our own following expand. But the more people who are interested in stuff that's similar in viewpoint and perspective to what I'm putting out there, the better off I am. The more the concepts that we talk about here are in the algorithms, whether from me or somebody else, the more we benefit. That's how we got to view this. No more competition. No more trumpets, saying we don't need oboes. None of this, right? None of this. We got to get over this, right? There's a job that needs to be done, and we got to do it. Chaya, you know how to get me talking. Sometimes you will ask me questions that are very, very simple, and you'll get me opening up. You loosen up my tongue. So you should be very proud of yourself, Chaya, because you just asked me, what about the 2000 anti-war movement? And I gave like a 40-minute answer. So there you go. All righty. What about people equating communism and fascism? Well, this is a tactic. This comes out of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Susan Sontag, who was one of the main intellectuals the Congress for Cultural Freedom promoted, she said, communism is nothing but the most effective form of fascism. And you have to redefine fascism in order to do that. Fascism is a mobilization of destruction, and driving living standards down in order to hold off an economic crisis. Nazi Germany, they stabilized the economy by putting half the country in concentration camps and the other half in military uniforms. And they they beat down, put a whole bunch of people in concentration camps, broke the labor movement, funded the economy with basically a prison industrial complex, started military spending, and they rebooted the economy with mass political repression. That's fascism. Similar in Italy, similar in Spain with Franco. And that's what fascism is, right? People who want to make fascism an aesthetic. Fascism is an aesthetic. It's not an aesthetic, okay? In fact, the aesthetics of fascism were largely ripped off from communism. Trotsky largely invented fascist aesthetics, right? I know that sounds a little wild, right? But Leon Trotsky, right? During the Russian Civil War, he was the front man for the Red Army, and he put on a crazy costume with a visor, helmet, and a big long coat and leather pants, and they sent him from military base to military base, and they would line up all the people who deserted, like they were going to shoot him for deserting, and then Trotsky would show up and say, "Stop!" And then he would give a fiery speech about the proletariat, and people would break down and cry, and it was amazing. And then they would want to go out and fight for the revolution, and they would all salute with their fist salutes. And then Trotsky would pull out a gold watch and pick a random soldier and say, "I'm going to give you a gold watch, yay!" And then he would get his gold watch, and everyone would applaud. Hey, no one ever got a gold watch. And it was this amazing, amazing show with a guy in a military uniform and a visor. And all the Hitler stuff, right? All the Nuremberg rallies and all of that. That all probably has a lot more to do with Leon Trotsky than it does with, I don't think Hitler invented that stuff, right? The Red Army, Trotsky, why did they do it? Did they do it because it's an evil, satanic tech? No, they did it because it works. It works. You're trying to, build a mass movement. You want to have effective meetings where people feel emotional and they get pumped up about the cause. There's nothing fascist about it. It's fascists use it. Religious groups use it. Communists use it. It's just a thing people do. And there's nothing fascist about it. There is no fascist aesthetic. There is fascism, a political form, an economic move when capitalism is in crisis. But there's no fascist aesthetic. There is no fascist aesthetic. Okay? Right? I mean, look. Communists have always had this salute. Did you know that? We saluted ourselves. This comes from the Paris Commune. I've told that story before. Right? German social democracy, salute. So, because communists had their salute, Nazis are coming around and they're like, oh shit, well, I guess we should come up with our salute. And they came up with their salute. And I can't do it because then it'll be screenshotted and people will go, aha, we got him. So I can't do that salute. But why do you think they started doing their salute, right? Communists, they used to march around with red armbands on. Well, another political movement in Germany also started marching around with red armbands on. Are red armbands fascist? No, they're just things people do. Why do you think that Lenin and Stalin and Hitler all had very distinct mustaches? Why? Why do you think that? Why did Lenin have a goatee, Stalin have a handlebar, and Hitler have a Charlie Chaplin? Because back then, when they were printing posters, propaganda posters for political leaders, they did not have great detail, right? They didn't have like 3D printers and, fancy, inkjet or whatever. They didn't have that back then. So if they wanted to make a poster for Lenin, they gave him a goatee and a bald head. Everyone knew that was Lenin. They made a poster for Stalin. They put a handlebar on it. Everyone knew that was Stalin. For Hitler, they put a Charlie Chaplin on him. Everybody knew that was Hitler. Right? Is there something inherently fascist about distinctive facial hair? Is facial hair part of the fascist aesthetic? No, it's not. There is no fascist aesthetic, okay? And if you go looking for a fascist aesthetic, you're going to come to the conclusion that communism is fascist, because communism is a mass movement that took place in modernity, in the modern era. And because of that, there are going to be aspects of communism that are going to remind you of fascism. Uniforms, marching, salutes, slogans, fiery speeches, people wanting to live for a cause greater than themselves, God forbid, belief that there is objective reality. None of this is fascist. Fascism is a mass movement of destruction to save capitalism. Fascism is mobilizing society to tear shit down and tear shit apart so that a capitalist crisis can be liquidated. It's a form of Bonapartism and capitalism in decay. R. Palm Dutt wrote a very, very good book on this. Very, very good book on this. So that's what fascism actually is. But the synthetic left, Theodor Adorno, Susan Sontag, Hannah Arendt, they went to great lengths to obscure this, right? Hannah Arendt wrote a book called Eichmann in Jerusalem. And when I first read the book, I loved it, right? Because I'd grown up in a very conservative area, and I was very angry about this conservative area that I grew up in. So I loved the book. But I look at the book now, and I realize it's toxic. It's a toxic book. But at the time I read it, I liked it. But basically the message of Eichmann in Jerusalem by Hannah Arendt is that, it's called the banality of evil. There wasn't anything special about Adolf Eichmann, this Nazi war criminal who got the death penalty, who was arrested in Argentina, taken to Israel and hung. There wasn't anything special about him, really. I mean, he was just a normal dude. He was in the YMCA, he joined the Nazis, and he ended up being a mass murderer and running gas chambers. But he was just a normal dude. Well, he was a normal, average person. And that's the point of Hannah Arendt's book, right? And it shows that, her point is that conformity, right? And I read it, the first time I read it, I thought, oh, see, I'm smart enough to oppose the war, but these people that just go along with everything, they're all a bunch of Eichmanns. If you actually read the book, it's not like that. The message is, deep down, the working class are all Nazis. Deep down, ordinary people who live in ordinary towns and do ordinary jobs are all Nazis. That's the message. Deep down, you're a Nazi. Deep down, the people in your neighborhood are Nazis. And it's the great intellectuals like Hannah Arendt and Susan Sontag. And, they're the ones that are good, but ordinary people are all Nazis. And populism is dangerous. Mass movements of working people fighting for their rights are dangerous because it's all those Eichmanns getting together, all those normal working people that are dangerous. And that we need to erect special barriers to make sure that the ordinary people never get together and assert their rights, because deep down, they're all Adolf Eichmann. That's the message of the book. It is anti-populism. It equates fascism with populism. If you're building a mass movement of working people, it's fascist. And the Soviet Union, according to Hannah Arendt and Susan Sontag, fascist, right? China under Mao, fascist, right? Why? Because all the ordinary people are getting together and protesting and when ordinary, and we have to have special measures to control those dangerous ordinary people, because deep down they're all Nazis. It's vile. It's a vile book. It's a vile book. And that is the message of the synthetic left. Communism understands scientifically what fascism is. The synthetic left thinks that fascism is whenever the rabble get together, whenever the inferior working people start getting together and organizing for their rights and threatening the sacred individuality of the petty bourgeoisie. Folks, Vosch hates average working people. He does, okay? Let's just be real. Vosch hates average working people, right? He's a rich kid from Beverly Hills. His dad's a Hollywood producer, and he cannot comprehend why anyone would ever vote Republican in their life. I don't know if he's ever met anyone in his life who opposed gay marriage, okay? He lives in this liberal bubble. He's better than everyone else, right? And he looks at January 6th, and he thinks, oh my God, all these inferior human beings who didn't go to elite schools like me and aren't from Beverly Hills are like getting together. We can't have that, right? And then he sees, that, Caleb is on there talking about, working people fighting for their rights and defending China. And, oh my God, Caleb wants something like January 6th. It must be the same thing. Well, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. But to him it is, because for Vosch, for Susan Sontag, for Hannah Arendt, for Theodore Adorno, for Mary McCarthy, for the synthetic left, fascism is when the stupid, inferior rabble get together and start threatening their right to be better than everybody else. Anti-fascism is nothing for the synthetic left but an expression of elitism. According to them, anti-fascism means we have to control the inferior rabble and make sure they don't start setting up governments or mobilizing or anything like that. This is what the synthetic left believes fascism is. And so according to them, communism and fascism are the same thing. According to them, because they have the same fear, right? It's the same fear that underlies George Orwell and his writing, the same fear that underlies Anthem by Ayn Rand and her dystopia. It's the post-World War II generation. It's their social alienation. That is their understanding of fascism. And based on that, yeah, communism and fascism, they're both mass movements. They're mass movements to serve completely different purposes. But that doesn't matter to these people. Because for them, all politics is about keeping them safe from the inferior rabble. Okay. Andy said he really liked the CPI Manual. Great. Well, if you want to order it in bulk and distribute it, I just sent a bunch of copies to Chicago. There's somebody in Chicago who just ordered it in bulk. So, yeah, if you want a bulk rate of it, you want to start a reading group or something, just reach out to me. You know how to reach me. Non-Western anarchism. Well, it's interesting because, there was non-Western anarchism a long time ago. Nowadays, there's very little. But, there's some hipster rich kids in most developing countries that are anarchists, but there's not mass anarchist movements in the developing world. But historically, there were. Peter Kropotkin, for example. And Mao himself was a follower of Peter Kropotkin before he became a communist. In the early part of the 20th century, there were mass anarchist movements in the Third World, mainly because the anarchists believed the peasants were revolutionary rather than the industrial workers. That was the primary difference between communists and anarchists back in the day. So there you go. All right. Capitalism's death toll, incalculable. And they just say it's not real capitalism. But I'm sorry, 20 million workers sent to their death in World War I. Genocide after genocide, famine after famine in the developing world. I mean, free market, free trade policies have killed millions and millions of people, and no one ever adds it up, right? Iran's election turnout, why was it low? Because Rouhani, Rouhani had a lot of people in Iran convinced that he was going to get in there and he was going to make a deal with the United States and make the economy better. And he got in there, and that was not possible. So generally, the people that voted for Rouhani are demoralized right now and not voting. Meanwhile, the people that are generally supportive of the system, they went out to vote. There you go. That's the thing. Rouhani very much appealed to anti-regime elements. People in Iran that don't like the Iranian government were very supportive of Rouhani, and Rouhani failed. He completely failed. The United States stabbed Iran in the back. So anti-regime elements didn't turn out to vote, and those who support the Iranian government did. There you go. And there's demoralization, right? People, again, Rouhani was supposed to bring them change by making a deal with the United States, and it didn't happen. So now, a hardliner who's more anti-capitalist is in there. Ahmadinejad was not allowed to run. So Riazi is the candidate. Favorite book in the Bible would be the Book of Acts. The Book of Acts is my favorite because it's about the origins of the church and how the church was created. It's fascinating. It begins with the Great Commission, with Christ's ascendancy into heaven, Pentecost, make disciples of all nations. Great stuff. Top book recommendations for trots. If you're a trot, you need to read The New York Intellectuals. The New York Intellectuals by Alan Wald is a history of your movement. It's called The Rise and Fall of the Anti-Stalinist Left, and it talks about the CIA and Trotskyism. And if you're a Trotskyist, you can denounce all of that. You can know about this. Many people who are trots know all about it. But if you are a Trotskyist, you need to know about the New York Intellectuals. You need to know about Max Shachtman. You need to know about Martin Aburn. You need to know about, who else? You need to know about Mary McCarthy. You need to know about Irving Kristol. You need to know about Irving Howe. You need to read the New York Intellectuals. That talks about how the neocons emerged out of Trotskyism, how Trotskyism got mixed up with the CIA during the 1950s. If you're a Trotskyite, if you're asking me as a trot what books you should read, I would recommend you go and read the New York Intellectuals. And if you want to read what Trotskyites have to say about the topic, go and read In Defense of Marxism by Trotsky. Go and read The Struggle for a Proletarian Party by Cannon. That's their version of events, but you need to read about this. What? Actions for MLs. All right. You need to read the New York Intellectuals. And there's a number of books. Look, I actually learned the most about Trotsky by reading the writings of Isaac Deutscher. He wrote a three-part biography of Trotsky. The Prophet Armed, the Prophet Unarmed, and the Prophet Outcast. That's very good. Very good source on Trotsky. Read Trotsky himself, right? I did see about proletarian patriotism. You're on the list, but I've got a lot to get through here. So there you go. All right, who was Bukharin? Bukharin was a member of the Bolshevik Party. And Bukharin, there was the famous incident right before the Russian Revolution. The Bolsheviks decided that they were going to make the Soviet government the government. They were going to take power. Bukharin and Zinoviev voted against it and didn't agree with it. And they were outvoted. The Bolsheviks were going to take power. So they voted against it. And they lost, and the Bolsheviks voted to take power. So right beforehand, Zinoviev and Bukharin went out to the capitalist media, the capitalist press, and, said, hey, announced in the capitalist press, just so you know, our party, the Bolsheviks, are planning to, take power, and we don't agree with that. So just so you know, and they just told the bourgeois press what the Bolsheviks were planning to do, leaked the Bolsheviks' plan to the bourgeois press, and, yeah. Well, Lenin was furious about this. He said they could be shot for this. This is like a huge, military, they basically announced what we plan to do in the media. You can't do that. Lenin wanted them expelled from the party, right? He wanted them expelled from the party. He said, in a military situation, people could get the death penalty for this. Goodness gracious. Zinoviev and Bukharin need to be out of the party. Well, the Central Committee outvoted Lenin. They said, no, they're okay. outvoted Lenin. Trotsky, others, they outvoted Lenin. And Zinoviev and Bukharin stayed in the Bolshevik Party. So, fast forward, right? So, after the death of Lenin, you have three proposals for the future of the Soviet Union. First is Trotsky, the theory of permanent revolution. He's saying he wants the USSR to militarize its economy, militarize everything, and the USSR be a permanent holdout, just be a temporary holdout in the permanent revolution to spread communism all over the world. That's not popular, not going to work. Bukharin, on the other hand, he says, look, Russia's too poor to have communism. We just need to have capitalism and just indefinitely continue the new economic policy. Have capitalism, sign treaties with the West, and eventually build up enough forces that we can start having socialism. Just kind of a permanent, free market kind of thing with communists, still in power. Stalin had the idea of socialism in one country, 5-year economic plans. So Stalin prevailed. In 1928, Stalin became the dominant, political figure. Bukharin was the right opposition, and Trotsky was the left opposition. Trotsky was defeated first. Trotsky and Bukharin teamed up and defeated, Stalin and Bukharin teamed up and defeated Trotsky. Then Stalin defeated Bukharin. And socialism in one country was the policy. And if they had not implemented socialism in one country, there's a very good chance the Soviet Union would have lost World War II, right? Only Stalin's huge industrialization projects, building up the country so it was strong enough to withstand the Nazi invasion, that was a huge, huge thing to do. Stalin's policies prevailed and industrialized the Soviet Union very rapidly. So there you go. What about people who would say that Fusion City is on stolen land? I mean, first of all, I don't envision Fusion. Let me just make clear. I don't envision Fusion City being simply the property of the United States. It should be like the UN. It should be an international territory. It wouldn't be right to ship all these scientists from China and all these scientists from Russia and all these scientists from Iran to the United States. It should be an international zone. It should be like the UN. You have to have a passport to go in and go out. It should be Fusion City. And what they develop should be the property, largely, book recommendations for tagging, should be the property of all humanity, right? And it shouldn't be the private property of any corporation. So yeah, it wouldn't be stolen. It would be decolonized because it would become international territory. Okay, alrighty. A colonized term used by the synthetic left. These people don't know what it means. Again, these people think imperialism and colonization, they see everything in cultural terms. They're not thinking about economics. They don't understand the economics of imperialism. Alrighty. Chinese healthcare versus Soviet healthcare. Again, go to Nathan Rich. Watch Nathan Rich's video about Chinese healthcare. Chinese healthcare is not like the Soviet system where it's like a national health service. It's a little bit different. It's different in every region. There are different companies, etc. So go and watch Nathan Rich. The New York Times has just lied excessively about China's healthcare system. And Nathan Rich ripped him a new one. And it was great. Alrighty. The Haitian coup. Was that where they removed Aristide? Right? Or is that the one where they brought Aristide in? Or I don't know enough about Haitian politics to really answer that. Okay. How is socialism both democratic and illiberal? Simple, right? Democracy means the will of the people. That's all it means. The will of the people. That's really all democracy means. Okay? Look up democracy. It means the will of the people. In ancient Greece is where the term originated. And in ancient Greece, democracy was seen as a bad thing. In ancient Greece, they argued that there were 3 political systems and that all 3 of them had a good version and a bad version. In ancient Greece, the monarchy was good. But the monarchy could degenerate into tyranny, and the tyranny was bad. That was the rule of one man. If the man is good, he's a monarch. If the man is bad, it's tyranny. Then you have the rule of an elite, right? And if the elite is good, it's oligarchy. Right? Good elite, oligarchy. MLM, all right, MLM principles. the elite is good, it's oligarchy. If the elite is bad, it's plutocracy. Right? Good elite, oligarchy, bad elite, plutocracy. And in ancient Greece, then if it's an elected government, if all the citizens, all free citizens get to vote, if it's good, it's a republic. If it's bad, it's democracy. In ancient Greece, the term democracy was bad. It meant mob rule. And, this is why the John Birch Society and a lot of libertarian kind of people will say America's a republic, not a democracy. And they think democracy is bad because they say, look, republic means you have an elected government that protects people's rights, but democracy could mean the tyranny of the majority, could mean mob rule. Democracy just means the rule of the people. That's all it means, right? And it's just a vague concept, and in ancient Greece it was considered to be bad. Now, democracy, the way we understand it in the United States, is really a republic. It means an elected government, right? We say, oh, this government is not elected, it's not a democracy. This government was elected, it's a democracy. Or this government, their elections, we don't consider them to be real, so they're not a democracy. This country, their elections are real, we consider them to be a democracy. But at the end of the day, every socialist country, China, former Soviet Union, Cuba, Venezuela, every anti-imperialist state, Iran, Venezuela, Nicaragua, all these countries are far more democratic than the United States. They're not far more Republican in the sense that their elections are not necessarily the same way ours are, but they're more democratic in the sense that the people are more involved in governing. The will of the people is more enacted. The Chinese Communist Party would not be in power for a minute if it didn't have a huge, well-organized base of the population to back them up. 90 million party members, a well-organized network of people. The Chinese people are far more involved in their own governing process than Americans are. Right? I'm just telling you, I've seen it in Iran. Every neighborhood has a Basij council that carries out the will of the Islamic Revolution on the local level. Iranians are far more involved in governing Iran than Americans are. Maybe they don't have anywhere near the level of civil liberties that we have. I mean, let's be real about that. I'm not gonna tell you they have more freedom than we have, because they don't. But they're far more involved in running Iran than Americans are. How involved are you in running your neighborhood? Probably not much. But go to Iran, average Iranians, there's Basij councils, they're involved. You go to Venezuela, the Bolivarian circles, right? You go to Nicaragua, the Citizens' Power Councils. Anti-imperialist governments are more democratic. They're more democratic than non-imperialist government, than capitalist societies are, because the state, because it has a hostile relationship with capital, is dependent on a highly mobilized population. In our system, the government wants us to stay out of politics. It wants us to be smoking weed or looking at porno or, playing football, or doesn't want us involved in politics. But in a socialist society, that government knows it has to stay in power. In order to stay in power, it needs a highly organized, mobilized population. So, in that sense, because people are involved in carrying out and mobilized to carry out the will of the state, it's more democratic. Because all democracy means is will of the people. If you have a government that's dependent on thousands and thousands and thousands of well-organized people in every neighborhood and every community carrying out its wishes, in Cuba they have the committees to defend the revolution. I mean, that's, people running the government, people being the government, is more democratic than having people stay home. So, people equate democracy with civil liberties, and that's not exactly correct. I am for civil liberties, but democracy just means the will of the people, okay? Now, what's the difference between that and liberalism? Aha! Now, liberalism means the individual takes priority above all else. Liberalism is the rights of man. Liberalism is individual rights, okay? And most of that's good. I mean, I'm for free speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. These are good things. But these societies are illiberal in the sense that as the people are mobilized, as there is more democratic participation, the people do have a unifying ideology. Liberal societies tend to say we don't have an ideology, right? The United States, supposedly we have no ruling ideology here. Did you know that? No ruling ideology here. No, there's no American ideology. We just believe whatever we want and we vote for what. There's no ruling ideology here. You know, that's liberal societies. It's supposed to not have any ideology. There's supposed to be no ruling ideology. The government's not supposed to have any mission. No, mission. You know, it's just supposed to be the will of the people and everyone lives their own life. And that's bullshit, right? The government here does have an ideology. It's called liberalism. They have an economic system. It's called capitalism, right? And liberalism is pretty ridiculous. It's this notion that the state has no purpose, the state has no ideology, and hands off individuals. And socialist societies are illiberal in that they're, mobilizing people to carry out an agenda. The government believes in an ideology called Marxism or socialism. It carries out, that agenda. It mobilizes the population to carry those goals out. And it's democratic in that it depends on that well-mobilized population to carry it out. And that there's a relation, the state and the population are one, right? So, yeah, in fact, I would argue that to be truly democratic, you have to be a liberal. Liberalism means that the people are not being mobilized to carry out a project. Liberalism means that that we just kind of hands off. You're on your own. No. In order to really have a democratic state where the will of the people is enacted, the state has to be mobilizing the people to carry out their will. So again, this is the confusion. I hope that was helpful. Do I support tariffs? It depends on the situation. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It just depends. Every country's going to have some form of tariff or customs. But is it good in this instance? Is it bad? It depends, right? I know Marx was generally was for free trade. That's true because he thought it would spread capitalism. What are the politics of Bob Dylan? He was New Left. Bob Dylan was New Left. He had songs mocking the John Birch Society. He played at peace marches. He was like a New Left kind of guy. There's an influence of the CP. Like he started singing like his hero, Woody Guthrie. He tried to sing like Woody Guthrie, and Woody Guthrie was, out of the Communist Party tradition. There was a whole folk revival, in the late 50s, early 60s. And that was largely, the Communist Party had a lot to do with that. Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, people like that. And it was, the folk revival of Greenwich Village and, and all of that. It was like kind of a cultural... It was in response to McCarthyism. After McCarthyism was over, you had the folk revival, which was a cultural trend, Hootenanny and the Kingston Trio and all of this. And it was largely critical of the government, critical of militarism, witty humor while also singing about peace and, supporting the civil rights movement. The folk revival of the early 60s. That's Bob Dylan's politics. And he's shifted. I know he's a big supporter of Israel, and I think he was an evangelical Christian, and then he was an Orthodox Jew, and his views have shifted. But the Bob Dylan, the early Bob Dylan that everybody knows, the answer is blowing in the wind, that kind of thing, that's the folk revival. That's the New Left. All right. Why were there not protests against the Korean War? Well, my friend, I would encourage you. It may be hard to find. Go and pull up a video that I have called Memories in Red. It's a video that I put on my channel a long time ago. I interviewed a woman named Frances Dostal. And Frances Dostal was kind of a mentor to me. She's probably one of the people who taught me the most as I was coming up. And she grew up in the Communist Party. She eventually joined the Socialist Workers' Party and eventually founded the Workers' World Party. She was a founding member. She taught me a lot. I learned a lot from her, right? She'd spent her whole life as a communist. And I interviewed her. I did an hour-long interview with her about her childhood and her upbringing. And I believe she was in nursing school at the time of the Korean War, during McCarthyism. And it's not in the video, I don't think, but she would tell about the one protest against the Korean War. There was one protest against the Korean War. You have to remember, during the Korean War, McCarthyism was on. It was illegal to be a communist. World War II had just ended. The population was, psyched up, and TV was a new invention, and TV had people convinced the Soviets were going to nuke us and kill us, and McCarthyism, and so it was a very conservative political atmosphere. There was one protest against the Korean War. It was a big protest. It was organized by the Communist Party, and a lot of people got beaten up and injured. Howard Fast, he wrote an autobiography, and he talks about the protests against the Korean War. There were protests against the Korean War in New York City. I think there were some in Los Angeles as well. But the Communist Party was a completely underground, illegal organization at that time. So it was very difficult for them to do that. And the country, it was very hard to organize. The Communist Party, the national leadership were in jail. Their publications were banned from the mail. They were very much, functioning. They were barely publicly functioning, but they still did protest the Korean War. And let me add that while there weren't a lot of protests in the United States, the soldiers largely, were protesting, right? Many instances during the Korean War, because what American soldiers did during the Korean War, this is what makes me so angry. Americans, we always hear, oh, North Korea is so evil. Do you have any idea what American soldiers were ordered to do during the Korean War? Every building above 1 story tall was bombed. Children would be there's stories of children in basements hiding, and the American GIs coming and pouring gasoline into the basement and burning them alive. You have no idea how horrific the Korean War was. Bruce Cummings is the most well-respected scholar on Korea in the United States, by far. University of Chicago, Bruce Cummings. And he made a documentary for BBC called The Unknown War about all the horrific things that the USA did in Korea during the Korean War. And they wouldn't show it on American television. And there are many instances during the Korean War where there were American soldiers that were being told, there's a bunch of civilians over there. We heard that one guy was a communist, so just go kill them all. There are many instances during the Korean War where the soldiers said, I'm not going to do that. They just said, I'm not going to do that. And they didn't. They didn't. And there were many instances during the Korean War of American soldiers just refusing, insubordination, just saying, I am not going to commit atrocities like this. You are asking me to kill innocent people. These people aren't our enemies. These are very, very poor people on the Korean Peninsula who've been fighting Japan for 30 years, and now we're the new occupiers, and they see us as the end. No, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. And there were many, in the U.S. Army itself, many soldiers said, I'm not going to do this. I am not going to do this. And let me add, a number of U.S. soldiers defected and went over to China. And on top of that, in the POW camps, over 4,000 American soldiers became communists in POW camps. 4,000 American soldiers became communists in the prisoner of war camps. 4,000. Do you know any communist group in the United States that has 4,000 members now? But 4,000 members of the American military were captured, signed confessions to committing war crimes against the Korean people and against the Chinese people. Yeah. And, the Korean War, it was over. And then the USA tried to do basically the same thing in Vietnam. Mass bombings, divided country. And in Vietnam, it all fell apart. It all fell apart. So there you go. The Korean War was like the rehearsal for the Vietnam War. And the Vietnam War, basically, it was the most humiliating defeat for the United States. Look, the fact that the Korean people could do what they did. North Korea is at this point the only country in the history of the world that has ever captured a U.S. Army general. Right? Now, there are other generals that have been captured from the Marine Corps and stuff like that. But the only country in the world to have ever captured a U.S. Army general is North Korea. Right? So, to say there weren't protests against the Korean War, the historical circumstances were very different, but there were. Within the Army, there were defections. So there you go. What about people who say proletarian patriotism is reactionary? Well, first of all, there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism. Okay, that's the first thing we need to be clear about. Patriotism is nothing but loving the country in which you live and wanting things to improve. Look at your neighborhood, your community. Do you want things in your neighborhood and community to get better? If the answer is yes, then you are patriotic. If the answer is no, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. You ain't a leftist if the answer is no. But, you know, I mean, this. If you look at your neighborhood, your community, do you want the people there to be more prosperous? Do you want them to have a better life? If the answer is yes, you're patriotic. And the way to be truly patriotic is to want imperialism to be dismantled and socialism to emerge. Right? To be truly patriotic is to be socialist. Nationalism and national chauvinism are different. Nationalism is loyalty to one's nation, right? You know, Vietnamese people are nationalistic in many ways. They're fighting for their nation, right? Cuban people are nationalistic. They're fighting for their nation, right? The United States is not a nation, right? Nations have a common language, a common territory, a common culture, and we don't have any of that here. The USA is not a nation, has never been a nation, okay? So you can't be an American nationalist, number one. Number two, national chauvinism, right? My country's better than your country. This is the greatest country in the world. Yeah, that's reactionary. That's reactionary. National chauvinism is reactionary. Definitely. National chauvinism is reactionary. American nationalism is stupid because the USA is not a nation. There is no American culture. There's no American religion. There's no American nationality. There's no American language. The USA is not a nation, okay? So nationalism is nationalism. For people in the colonized world, it's a good thing. For imperialists, it's not a good thing. And, you know, national chauvinism, my nation's better than your nation, is never a good thing, right? You know, we never want to believe some people are naturally superior to others. But patriotism, right? Patriotism, right? It's like your family. Do you love your family? Right? If you're a parent, do you love your kids? Yeah. Yeah. Does that mean that you, that you go around killing other people's kids? No. It just means you have a particular affection. And if you really love your kids, you should want them to get along with other people's kids. And you should want them to go to a school where there's, good conditions for all. And you should want them to live in a society that's healthy. Patriotism is okay. And socialists need to be patriotic. We need to be patriotic. We need to get people to understand that we love our country, we love our community, and that only socialism will save America. And if we can't get beyond this, this teenage rebellion, I hate this country, fuck this country. If you can't get over this like, I hate the flag, I will never, if you can't get over that, I can't help you. Can't help you. I mean, but you got to get over that. If we are actually aspiring to run the government of the United States of America, then we need to love the United States of America. Communists in Brazil don't say fuck Brazil. Communists in Peru don't say fuck Peru. Communists in Cuba don't say fuck Cuba. Communists in Vietnam don't say fuck Vietnam. All right? And if this is not a teenage edgelord thing, if this isn't childish rebellion, if this is serious, we need to oppose nationalism, oppose national chauvinism, but be patriotic. We need to be patriotic. Juneteenth. I heard of Juneteenth when I had not heard of it until I was an activist. When I was 19 years old, I was an activist. I was in Detroit, and I went to a Juneteenth celebration. That's where I first heard of it. I hadn't heard of it, right? Because I'm white, and I grew up in a town that, there were a few black families, but it was largely a white town. And I didn't know about Juneteenth. But when I was an activist, and I was in Detroit, I went to a Juneteenth celebration. And I learned about it, and then Trump organized his stupid rally, on that day. And so then it became a national news story. And now a lot of white liberals who, like me, didn't grow up ever hearing about it, have all heard about it. It's a good holiday, right? And we should talk about the role, of Karl Marx, the role of Harriet Tubman, the role of John Brown. The abolitionist movement was a very good thing. The defeat of slavery was a good thing. W.E.B. Du Bois and his black reconstruction was a very good thing. We should talk about this, and, we need to fight against that gone with the wind narrative of the Civil War. And we need to fight against the idea that somehow the Confederacy was good for white people, because it wasn't. Most white people They didn't have it as bad as the slaves did. I mean, no question about that. But the Confederacy was very bad for white workers as well. It was bad for slaves. It was also bad for white workers. The Confederacy was an abomination. The defeat of the Confederacy was one of the greatest moments in American history. Right? Reconstruction is a moment where low-income blacks and low-income white people, in some areas, they were redistributing land. And read Freedom Road by Howard Fast. Read Black Reconstruction by W.E.B. Du Bois. The reclaiming the history of the Civil War is very important. Is China the next superpower? China's already a superpower. So is Russia. I already talked about Iran and the elections, Gleb. Roll back. I already talked about it. Actions for MLs. Well, I'm not engaged in political activism at this time. I'm engaged in education. And around the country, right now, there are some closed meetups that are in the works. But, they're closed because of pandemic stuff and all of that. But they're just going to start being public events pretty soon, right? As things are opening up pretty much at this point. So stay tuned. But the Center for Political Innovation is engaging in, political education, raising awareness, etc. So there you go. Book recommendations for tankies. Okay. Anything by Michael Parenti, right? Michael Parenti is a great tanky intellectual. Anything by William Z. Foster. History of the Three Internationals by William Z. Foster is the book I've learned the most from of any book I've ever read. Twilight of World Capitalism. What else? There's a lot, again, if you want to learn about Korea, read Bruce Cummings, North Korea, Another Country, Korea's Place in the Sun. What else? There's a lot. I mean, you said for tankies. I mean, that's a broad category. I enjoy Gus Hall's writings. I don't always agree, but, Working Class USA, The Power in the Movement by Gus Hall is a very good book. His book, Basics for Peace, Democracy, and Socialism is a very good book by Gus Hall. Imperialism Today by Gus Hall is very good. There's a very good Marxist academic who was a tanky called Albert Szymanski. And he wrote The Red Flag is Still Flying. He wrote Human Rights in the Soviet Union. Those are pretty good. All right, 90s Russia. Right? Albert Szymanski, Michael Parenti, Harpal Brar, I recommend his writings. They're very good. Harpal Brar wrote Perestroika, a critique of Perestroika. He wrote Imperialism, a very good book on imperialism. He's pretty good. Oil in Xinjiang. I've not heard of that, Chaya. Not heard of that. Doesn't, it's interesting. There you go. Book recommendations. Okay. And of course, there's my books, right? I would say that my book, We Are City Builders, the CPI Educational Manual, is it's a pretty good introduction to tanky stuff. So there you go. All right. Marxism, what principles do Marxist-Leninist Maoists believe in? MLM, the people who call themselves Marxist-Leninist Maoists, those are folks that, Marxism-Leninism is the Soviet ideology. And then on top of that, you have Mao Zedong thought, which is, what Mao added to it, which is in the Chinese Constitution. But the folks who call themselves Marxist-Leninist Maoists, that's an ultra-leftist current. That's the people that support the Shining Path in Peru, the people who support the Naxals of India. And they generally think that China became capitalist after Mao died. The Soviet Union became capitalist after Stalin died. They generally think all the communists in the world are revisionists. They tend to fetishize violence and armed struggle. This is an ultra-leftist current, and it's big on the internet, communism, Reddit, etc. And it's an ultra-leftist current. When I was a teenager, I flirted with those ideas, but it's an ultra-left idea, largely. All right, 90s Russia. In the 1990s, the economy of the Soviet Union fell. The fall of the Soviet Union, you had neoliberalism, shock therapy economics, mass privatizations, read The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, mass privatizations, mass unemployment, 30% unemployment, hunger on the streets. It was a disaster. The fall of the Soviet Union was an economic disaster, and Putin fixed it by putting oil and natural gas under state control and building two national champions, two state-controlled mega corporations, Gazprom and Rosneft. Now, folks, that's where this is ending for tonight. So, on that note, I'm going to say goodnight. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world.